So what are we here to discuss? We're here to discuss the repetitive flooding of our homes and our businesses along Cypress Creek. Since 2001, we've had 7 catastrophic floods here. It's time we addressed this and stopped it. We want to say, first of all, a big thank you to the Centrum for loaning us this facility. They've been very generous, and you can see this is a community gathering spot for us. The Centrum's been closed for 4 years now since Harvey, and you can see the high water marks out in the lobby of what Harvey did to the Centrum. It's also, I think, a leap of faith and a step forward that we see a facility that has installed the gear, the floodgates out here and the floodproofing all around this to defend themselves against flooding, because the sad fact is, folks, the cavalry's not coming over the hill for Cypress Creek next month. It's not going to happen. It's going to be a very long haul for us, so we need to be able to defend ourselves. We'd like to thank our speakers, Dr. Phil Bedient from Rice, Matt Zeve from Harris County Flood Control, all of our volunteers that have given up their evening to come here and help us with our presentation, and of course, our elected official who's here, Representative Sam Harless. Sam, do you want to show your permit to be here so nobody's afraid you'll be arrested? There it is. He got a note from the teacher and he's here. Thank you for coming, Sam. We really appreciate your efforts. How did we get here? How did we get into the situation we are? We can see from the Greater Houston Flood Consortium chart that prior to Harvey, the work done in Cypress Creek was not very much. We talk about the work that was done simply for flood mitigation, not repairs, not maintenance, but flood mitigation, digging of detention, channelization, channel bypass, levees. We only had about $14 million worth of work done, about 25 times less than many of the other watersheds. So we're way behind the 8 ball. If we hopelessly rip off Hannah's Community Impact newspaper for their excellent chart, we'll see why this is such a concern to us. The 100-year flood, or the flood that we have 1% chance of experiencing every year, and the tax day flood was a 100-year flood. Harvey was a 500-year flood. The tax day flood is what we're trying to mitigate. The tax day flood at the time was a 12-inch flood, but now that Atlas 14 has come out from NOAA, they're saying that that flood in the future is going to be 16 inches. So we couldn't handle the water that was here before, so what are we going to do with 25% more water? Well, I don't know. The salient thing for us along Cypress Creek to remember are the numbers 5 to 7 inches, because if we are looking at a short period of time, rainfall of more than 5 to 7 inches, Cypress Creek is going to overtop. This is not some number I pulled out of the air. I got this number from Harris County Flood Control, from Jeff Linder, who is their meteorologist and hydrologist, who studies all the channels in Harris County, and he says, in his opinion, it's 5 to 7 inches before we go over the top. So if you're hearing more of that, we're looking for a 9-inch rain, you can expect that there's going to be flooding along Cypress Creek. We can see that our infrastructure is not up to snuff either to handle this kind of thing. During the tax day storm of the bridges between I-45 and 290, 11 of the bridges were closed. They were all flooded. So who is at risk for flooding, and why is flooding bad? Well, of course, we're at risk, each one of us, our homeowners, our families, our neighbors, and so forth. Our businesses are at risk, not only of the economic loss of having to rebuild the business, but of all the viability of the business when they can't do business because they're flooded out. Dr. Bedient stopped at Perry's this evening for a snack on the way over, and you can see Perry's was underwater during the tax day flood too. Who else is at risk? These guys. These are our firemen, whether they're regular paid staff or volunteers, the various different constabulatories, the policemen around here, the ambulance drivers. When we stepped out onto the front of our house to go down to the rescue vehicle in the street, my wife was up to the middle of her chest in floodwater. She could not have gone out there by herself, but fortunately she was hanging on to a big Harris County deputy sheriff who had the cat under one arm and her under the other arm to help her get out. Those guys were in the water all day. They were in the water all the next day. It's not really fair to ask our public servants to give that kind of service. What can you do? What can I do on flooding on Cypress Creek? Well, there are some limited things you can do. Number one is buy flood insurance. I don't care who you are or where you live, you need flood insurance if you're in Harris County. We're too flat, we have too much rain. Never drive into high water. If you can't see the top of the curb, don't drive into the high water. your tailpipe will go under the water, your car will stall, it'll flood, ruin your car. Only 1 to 2 feet of moving water can sweep you away. We don't want that to happen to you. Set a flooding alert. You need to go to this website that we gave you on that sheet. It's called the Harris County Flood Warning Systems, maintained by Harris County Flood Control. It's an excellent site. It's not the world's most user-friendly site. It's, you can fight your way through it. You can make it happen. And it will give you a ton of information. It's a wonderful site as far as information if you can get it to work for you. And also you can set up a flood alert for you when the water is rising or when the water is forecast to rise and it looks like it's coming out of the channel. You'll receive an alert from the Harris County Flood Warning System. Now, I know a lot of you are in the prime of life like we are, but you may need a couple of extra minutes more than you used to have to react to things nowadays. We don't really have a good effective system. We're not going to blow the air raid sirens at you anymore about a flood occurring. So we need a way to warn everybody that the streets will be filled with water, they won't be usable, that your house may be filled with water, you need to evacuate. Number 4 is defend yourself, and that's why we asked the vendors to come today. There are things that you can do. George's cousins are here, and they talked about how they successfully defended their house against Harvey. They actually drained their pool and used it as their own private detention facility. They also put up flood barriers around the house, and it saved them from the Harvey floodwaters. The same thing can be found from the stories that you see in the vendors outside. We're not advocating for any one vendor. We don't endorse them. We're just telling you, for some of you, it may work. It's a new concept. You may be able to defend yourself and your property or your business. And lastly, you might have to move away. Harris County has a number of different home buyout projects that you may avail yourself from if your subdivision is subject to a home buyout, and if not, if you have that anxiety where every time a big thunderstorm comes over, you're getting up, going to the window and looking to see if you're flooding, you may be just better off from a life viewpoint to increase the quality of your life by moving away from this threat. So why are we talking to you? Well, we believe, like the Harris County Flood Mitigation Consortium, that an educated public is fundamental to building and sustaining support for the long-term and expensive work of mitigating the devastating impact of flooding. You have to know what's going on. You have to know the facts. I know it takes a little work, it takes a little attention, but when Harris County has a public engagement meeting and they say, here's what we're going to do, what do you think? You want to be able to not just stare at them and say, duh, you want to be able to ask them some cogent questions or tell them what you want the public servants to do for you, where you want your billions of tax dollars to be spent, and the only way you can know that is with some education. Lastly, we want you. We're not going anywhere with flood mitigation on Cypress Creek without you. There are 22 watersheds in Harris County, and don't listen to anybody that tells you there's no competition for money. There's limited funds for money for flood mitigation in Harris County. We're competing with 21 other watersheds. If we don't get up, yell and scream, and holler and scratch, and try to get our share, we won't get our share, as history has told us. So we need to be organized. We need to have a voice out here on Cypress Creek. We need to be able to talk to our elected officials. We need to be able to get a hold of our elected officials. Sam, thank you for coming tonight. We need to talk to them and tell them what we need, and we need to advocate for it. We need a voice, but the voice is not any good if it doesn't have any backing. So before you leave tonight, if you're willing to join with us in some sort of Cypress Creek group, advocacy group, a Cypress Creek voice about flooding to stop the repetitive flooding, please see one of the ushers, give us your contact information, see me or talk to George, and most particularly, I'm going to ask you, can you tweet? We can't tweet. Can you Facebook? Well, we're not very good at that either. How about TikTok? Do you know what that is? Well, we don't TikTok either, but what we're telling you is we desperately need a social media campaign to reach out to people. It's okay to have a website they can go to, but we need to push information out, and just putting it on Nextdoor next to the lost dog ads is not a very effective way of talking to people. So please, if you're willing to volunteer, it's not a full-time job, it's not even a part-time job. You may just be an advocate to your HOA, to your MUD, to your ESD, or to your Sunday school, to your school, to your canasta group. It doesn't matter. We need advocates out there. We need to talk about flooding so we can stop it. All right, I'm done, but I'm going to introduce you to a guy that is probably going to give us a lot of information. Dr. Phil Bedient is from Rice University. At Rice, he's the director of the Severe Storm Center. He's also the George R. Brown Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering. He's the chair of the Civil and Engineering Department at Rice University, and he was recently awarded the Lindsay Award from the American Institute of Hydrology for the work he's done in hydrology for the last 40 or 50 years? That long? Really? 40 years. He knows us. We're glad to have him here. He wrote his first paper on flooding on Cypress Creek in 1984. He wrote his most recent paper on flooding on Cypress Creek in 2019. He knows us. He knows what our problems are. Hopefully he has some solutions. Dr. Bedient.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the invite to come back out here. It seems like I was presenting out here a year or two ago. I forget the exact time frame. The floods in Houston have been devastating. There's no question about that. I was just reminiscing about the fact that I think I did that first flood study on Cypress Creek when I was 36 years old. I'm a little bit older than that now, but unfortunately, for all of us sitting here, Cypress Creek has, it's been a long-standing problem, and not a whole lot has been done, and it needs to be done. And so I'm here tonight to present sort of some flood mitigation options in Cypress Creek and just talk it through a little bit. This is going to be a hydrology lecture. So, flood mitigation options in Cypress Creek, and as I say, we're going to take a swing through all of this. There is kind of a hydrology training introduction here. There will be a quiz on this a little bit later, just to make sure that you understand where you live and what the risk and what the threat really is. You're seeing here the 22 or so watersheds that were described earlier for Harris County, and a number of these watersheds are prone to serious flooding. Brays Bayou, Greens Bayou, obviously Buffalo Bayou during Harvey, although, interestingly enough, Buffalo Bayou really did not have very much flooding downstream over many, many, many years prior to Harvey. So Buffalo Bayou is actually a pretty good protected system because of the presence of Addicks and Barker. Well, when Addicks and Barker were built back in the 40s, there was supposed to be some reservoirs, additional reservoirs, and a levee up in Cypress Creek. It was never built. So only Addicks and Barker were built, and so Cypress was not protected. So hydrology is this study of the occurrence and circulation and storage and distribution of surface water. And you might wonder, well, why is it that Houston is sort of this flood mecca? It really is. It's kind of the flood mecca of the United States, especially with Harvey and Imelda and Tax Day, Allison, Memorial Day. All of these floods seem to occur on holidays. In fact, Harvey occurred on, one of the Harvey days was August 29th. That's my anniversary. All right, so this is really getting a little ridiculous, but we're getting a lot of flooding, that's for sure. Now, there are a number of parameters and or data, and I apologize for using these boring terms right now, but trust me, in a slide or two, you're going to be delighted when you fully understand what's going on here. It's the intensity of the rain and it's the duration of the rain that really drives everything in Houston. And Matt will, I guarantee you, support me in this when I say that, for example, Tropical Storm Allison that dropped 16 inches of rain in 3 hours within the 610 loop, 16 inches of rain in 3 hours. I watched it at my home on radar. Compare that to Harvey, that dropped 30 some inches of rain, but it was over a 4 to 5 day period of time. And it turns out the intensities during Harvey were not all that great. And then there's tax day, 17 inches in 9 or 10 hours. And so it's that intensity and that duration, those two together. And that's what makes hydrology complex. And that's why I've had this long-standing career trying to figure all this out, because it really is quite complex. It's not only a function of that driver rainfall, but also the size, the slope, the shape of the watershed, the soil type of the watershed. We have generally lousy soils across Harris County, but you're blessed up here in Cypress Creek in that you generally have sandier soils, much more so than Buffalo or Braze, for sure. The channel type and morphology is all important. So that's what kind of drives the natural hydrologic response. Land use and land cover, that's what comes in and creates a problem, unless it's dealt with sort of in the initial stages. So there are three drivers. There's topography, and on the left-hand side is the new digital presentation of what's called LIDAR data. LIDAR came in right after Allison in 01, 02. It was then redone several years later, and then finally, most recently, we have 2018 LIDAR, and you can imagine that 2018 LIDAR was redone because of Harvey, all right? So that's one reason it was there. And you can see the soil types and the fact that your area up here has much sandier soils. But it's that imperviousness and that development that has created some real issues in the Harris County and Houston areas. Now, I was fortunate, and I'm going to just digress for a moment here, but I'll digress throughout this talk. I think, Paul, you said I had 2 hours, right? Okay. But I will digress a little bit. I started my career here at Rice by helping to design and develop the woodlands to the north. And it was an honor. I was a very, very young person. I spent 10 years at the woodlands helping to design detention ponds, greenways, natural drainage systems. We studied water quality. We studied everything. We studied all of the rainfall runoff response. What we learned there, I tried to take it to others in the county, in Harris County. Of course, that was in Montgomery County, but to no avail. And I tried for 20 years to try to sort of move that forward, and just to no avail. It was in the mid-'80s when Harris County and Harris County Flood Control started to seriously implement and look at detention, much to their credit. They started down that road. But again, it's just been a bit of a day late and kind of a dollar short in some of the watersheds, especially in Cypress Creek. So we know how to do it. We know how to solve these flood problems. It's just you've got to have the will and you've got to have the land to be able to go in and make these adjustments for mitigation. So the rain gauge map is useful. It is. We use it all the time. But more recently, the modern technology, and I tripped into radar rainfall in 1994, 95, just as that system was launching nationwide. And I worked with one of the premier radar experts in the U.S. who was up at OU with the Severe Storm Research Center. What the radar allows us to do, and Harris County Flood Control uses this radar system routinely, and they actually have it delivered from the same gentleman that I worked with, Baxter View. And it can be extremely accurate. It's a microwave. It gives you 5-minute rainfall on 1 square kilometer grids for the entire county. It is one of the largest and most accurate databases anywhere, and that's what really we use to try to figure out where the water's going. Okay. In addition, we have this LIDAR data, and it's a sort of a laser-induced data from an aircraft flying at about 3,000 feet. The beauty of this is you can get really, really accurate elevations, and that allows you then to predict what will the rainfall do in terms of where will it go, what will the flows be, how deep will the water get. That is the essential question that all hydrologists want to know the answer to. Lower Cypress Creek is where I concentrated. I did a little study on this just for this presentation, and this is using old information because we're waiting for Harris County Flood Control, and they're working very hard on a large grant to remap all of Harris County with more sophisticated computer models, two-dimensional models, as well as with 2018 LiDAR data. So I did a simple little study, just a back-of-the-envelope type calculation, and I want to share that with you tonight, on Cypress Creek. And you'll notice here we're running from about Highway 290 all the way down and then over to the watershed outlet, but we're going to stop and kind of consider the area between I-45 and further up to 290. That's what I consider lower Cypress Creek. That's the area in Cypress Creek that really has some serious problems. Now, we spent the last 3 years working on Addix-Barker, the overflow problem, the issues with Addix-Barker, the issues with Harvey, the issues with how does Cypress respond to that, and so now it ought to be lower Cypress Creek's turn to get some attention, some serious attention. And if nothing else comes of this meeting tonight, that's one of the things that I hope. And this graphic right here is the one that just lit me up like a Christmas tree. And the reason is, if you just look at the numbers for a moment, this is just right out of a standard computer model for rainfall runoff for the 100-year storm, which is the old storm, about 12 or 13 inches. New storm is about 17, plus or minus. That's in 24 hours. And you'll notice the lower end of Cypress, look at all those red values. Those are the cubic feet per second, or CFS per acre, coming out, compared to what you have in the upper part of Cypress. The upper part of Cypress is flatter than a pancake. It basically is the Katy Prairie and prairie land. And in fact, early on when I came to Houston, I used to always say Houston is so flat that if you stand on a beer can, you can see all the way to Dallas. Well, it's a tough group. All right, we're gonna continue with the jokes. You just work with me here, because I can't lecture to you about details like this without interjecting a little bit of humor. But there's not a lot of humor associated with this graphic. You can see 3 things going on here. The upper part of Cypress Creek, the far upper end, has this big sort of stream that kind of comes down and uses around, and then it flows underneath Highway 290. That's the upper part, and that actually during Harvey is what fed in and caused much of the damage and much of the problems in Addix and Barker. Further down, notice all the tributaries. Little Cypress Creek, and then multiple tributaries feeding in. Coming off of high ground, they actually come off of high ground and they feed into this low area along Cypress Creek. And it's that combination, ironically, of topography and landscape that creates most of the problems. That's why this is such a unique and complex story. Now, there's no question that it's flood prone. This is data from my colleague, Sam Brody. These are NFIP. This is just data. NFIP claims aggregated by census block back to 1972. If you add up all those numbers in Lower Cypress, it's well over $500 million spent for insured claims. $500 million. That's insane. Early on, Brays Bayou channelization project was $200 million. Second round of Brays Bayou was around $500 million. $700 million there, and they're still flood prone. They're not completely out of the woods yet, because again, with the new 100-year at 18 inches, it'll be interesting to see how many homes really do or don't flood. So this is Cypress Creek. This is where you live. Now, if you look at a map like this, and I'm showing here an aerial photo of Cypress 100-year floodplain, it looks like a nice thin little ribbon of impact, floodplain impact. It is a relatively narrow floodplain. Brays Bayou has areas that are 6 miles across of floodplain. 6 miles. It's insane. I've never seen such a wide floodplain. And there are other areas in Houston that have these wide floodplains, but not so Cypress Creek. So it's this narrow channel. that's cut, and all that water ends up there, and then we have all these homes that were built way back 70s and 80s, 90s, but especially 70s and 80s, that are built right down close to the water's edge, near where the trees are, where the attractive part of the watershed is located, and those are the homes that flood over and over. The 500-year, I'll toggle back. There's a 100-year, 500-year. Here's the difference. Not a whole lot of difference, because again, it's a relatively well-cut channel. So what we did, I got a team of students together in preparation for this presentation tonight, just to have some new information and new data. And so we looked at the gauges, and we looked at running from basically 290 down all the way to I-45. And we decided to sort of figure out a way that we might be able to, if you will, address this problem. Now, what you're looking at here, these are all the gauges. So let's go back and check those gauge numbers. They run from about 1120 at the downstream end to 1170 at the upstream end. Those are the numbers of the gauges. And you'll notice here's what happened. There's the 100-year, there's tax day, there's the 500-year, and there's Harvey. Now, the Harvey and the tax day are measured values. They went out to the field and measured those high water marks. The modeled values are from the older original hydrologic models, not the new ones, because they haven't come out yet. These are the old standard models that are available on the website. And you get a sense that Harvey truly was a pretty big event in this area, and you can see how it changes elevation as you go across. Okay. So what we decided to try to do is we're just going to kind of throw everything at it that we could. So we chose 3 areas, 3 major tributaries, and you could choose 5 or 6. In fact, the 3 we chose, we only came up with about 10,000 acre-feet of storage. Now, an acre-foot of storage, an acre is roughly 200 feet on a side, 1 foot deep. That's 1 acre-foot. It's a terrible unit, but that's the units that we use, unfortunately. It's a lot easier than cubic meters, trust me. All right. Now, so we're dealing with 3 of these, and I'm not including Little Cypress yet, but if I just include Reservoir 1, 2, and 3, that's about 10,000. If I add some more to Little Cypress, I'm at about, 13,000 acre-feet of storage. We're going to put that in, and we're going to allow those tributaries to come in and to peak shave. And when you peak shave, I'm going to show you a graph of that, so this will be on the quiz now. So get ready for this. Here's peak shaving. So you can see it. Oh, I went too fast. Let's go back. Here's peak shaving on Little Cypress. Let's go to the next one. I want to see Reservoir 1. Here's Reservoir 1. Peak shaving, we got about 200 acres, 15 feet deep. And what you're seeing on the right-hand side is what happens in that tributary. So in other words, you can take that tributary that's peaking at about 7,500 CFS, cubic feet per second, and if you cut that down, in other words, with that storage, you can knock that down to 4,000. That looks pretty good. Wow. That's 30, 40% cut. Yet, when you put that back into the flow at the junction down the tributary with everything that's coming down from upstream, you'll notice not much effect. And you'll notice also that there's a double peak going on here. There's an early peak and a later peak. That's been the problem of Cypress Creek all along, is when that later peak comes along and the earlier peak is already filled up into the storage areas, you've got a big problem on your hands. Okay. Here is the same thing for Reservoir 2. Again, peak shave, wow, I can knock it down from 8 to 4, and so on and so forth. Reservoir 3, let's go back. I can even get more, and a little bit of effort. And when we summarize all that, and this is my final slide now, so I know you're going to be excited about that, and then we're going to talk for the remaining 2 hours about what you just learned. But this is the takeaway message. I just purchased, and Harris County flood control went in and bought out all of these homes in order to put these ponds in at the appropriate location. And you're seeing 10 to 12% reduction in the peaks going on in the system. It's just not enough, folks. It's not enough to do anybody any good, and for all that upset and all that buyout, you've got a big issue. So where that leaves us, and I think I knew this before I did the analysis, but I wanted to share it with you because this is brand new stuff, and it says that we've got to get a lot more serious about moving this amount of water, which is in the range, you'll notice, of somewhere around 15 to 20,000 CFS during these floods, during the 100-year. And there are two opportunities here. There really are only two, unless you can figure out a way to make water disappear, and that's not on the list. One would be, and you've heard about this, I'm sure, the idea, the concept of this tunnel, some sort of a concrete 30 to 50 foot diameter tunnel that captures the water as you go down and moves a portion of it out, and it's underground. And these things, I mean, the ones in San Antonio, they go down 150 feet. They tunnel down, they go across, and then they come back up on the San Antonio River. And they were put in between the 98 flood and the 2002 flood, and they paid for themselves. That tunnel paid for itself based on the damages that were averted in the 2002 flood in San Antonio. Now, but it's a big expense. It's not cheap. They're, of course, talking about doing this on Addicks and Barker reservoirs as well, and these are tossed around. And then the other option is to try to figure out some way to just buy out all of these homes that are repeater flooding. And you can't do that. I mean, you'll destroy neighborhoods. You know, no one's going to do that. And for example, Meyerland in Houston was one of the saddest neighborhood cases I've ever seen, because it is the most flood-prone neighborhood in the United States. No one comes close. And those people, when they got flooded out a third time from Harvey, said, no, we will stay here, we will rebuild, we will lift, we will do whatever. And they, you know, I don't know how many homes were lifted out in Brays Bayou. Matt, you probably know, but it was just an enormous number as I drove through the neighborhood. It's maybe 2 out of every 3 homes seem to be 8 feet up in the air. And now they're sort of flood protected, but it costs $150,000 to $200,000 to do that. You cannot flood-proof individual homes away from this problem because the flows are too great. When you're dealing with 15 to 20,000 CFS, it's well, you saw it. You were up here for the case of Harvey, and you've seen it. You've seen the repetitive flooding. So anyway, that's it. That's what I wanted to present tonight.
Anybody got any questions?
Sure. Yes.
Where would the proposed tunnel go, and are you using directional drilling so that you can maintain stuff on the top, or you're going to have to buy a significant amount of land?
No, it's all underground. You're not there. The land issue is almost non-existent. That's the reason for the tunnel. But I'm not a tunneling expert by any means. But I'm mildly familiar with this just because I've read about it, and I know you can move 5 to 10,000 CFS depending upon the number of tunnels. You can move that out. That's a significant amount. When you move from 20 to 10, then you've started to mitigate flooding in Cypress Creek. And so that's one reason, the idea of the tunnel. And you'd start in sort of upstream, and you might have several points of entry coming down through the system, various tributaries, and then it would eventually go out and join up down there near the confluence with Spring Creek. That's the concept. But not been studied, not been looked at, just a passing thought, but it's probably something that ought to be looked at much more carefully.
We're also very fortunate to have with us tonight Matt Zeve. He's the Deputy Executive Director of Harris County Flood Control. Matt is an Aggie engineer. He's got a bachelor's and master's degree in civil engineering from Texas A&M University. He spent 20 years in moving that water that Phil was talking about. He came to flood control in 2015, and now he's in charge of, what, a couple of $1 billion worth of projects? More or less. That's your money. Matt, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. As Paul mentioned, my name is Matt Zeve. I am the Deputy Executive Director at the Flood Control District. And we have, as Paul mentioned, we do have several $1 billion worth of projects going on thanks to all of y'all voting for our $2.5 billion flood bond program back in 2018. And we have been hard at work putting y'all's money to work all over the county, and we're going to talk about that tonight, where we're spending that money and where we're going to spend that money. But before I get started, I work for the government. I work for a government agency. And there are two things that are very important for us to be successful. And we talked about money really briefly, but also support from our elected officials. So I really want to recognize our local, state, and federal elected officials that serve this area. And all three of those folks, Commissioner Jack Cagle, Harris County Precinct 4 Commissioner, Representative Sam Harless, and Congressman Dan Crenshaw, all three of those gentlemen are very, very big advocates for the flood control district and working on drainage projects in their areas, and have supported us from day one and continue to support us. And it's very important because when we don't have support from the political side, it makes our job more difficult to be successful. And I do want to brag really quickly on Representative Harless. I hope he doesn't mind. He passed some very common sense legislation this session. The session's still going on technically, but you probably didn't hear about this because it wasn't in the news, but he passed a bill that doesn't allow senior living facilities to be built within the 100-year floodplain in Harris County, which is just, it's just pure common sense, and it makes people a lot safer when that doesn't happen. So really want to thank Representative Harless for doing that and leading that charge. And I was lucky enough to help him with some information, help him staff with information. So, but just there's some good things that you may not hear about on TV, but there are some good things happening. So our mission at the Flood Control District, to provide flood damage reduction projects that work with the appropriate regard for community and natural values. Cypress Creek watershed. Dr. Bedient showed you the Cypress Creek watershed. I won't spend a lot of time on it. I just want y'all to know it's big and it spans a lot of areas. In fact, the Cypress Creek watershed actually starts in Waller County. So this is one of our watersheds that's actually in 2 counties. We have several, but it's a large watershed. And so the bigger the watershed, the more water, when rain falls on it, the more water reaches the creek. So I just want to keep that in mind, and it's always very important for everyone in Harris County to know what watershed they live in, because each one of them has their own special set of drainage issues and projects. So what are we up to? Here is a dot map, if you will, of our maintenance and capital improvement projects that we have going on in the Cypress Creek watershed. The orange dots are maintenance projects, the purple dots are capital improvement projects. George and Paul have become friends of mine over the past few years, and I will tell you that they never leave me alone about this. Maintenance projects are not their favorite projects, but they're some of my favorite projects because we have to take care of what we have. We do have an extensive drainage network in Cypress Creek, but we have to take care of it for it to function properly when we need it. So in the past, we haven't had as much money as we need to maintain 2,500 miles of channel that we're responsible for at the Flood Control District. But with the bond election passing and our frees up a lot of money for some deferred maintenance that we haven't had a chance to work on in years. And I'll show you a couple pictures of that because pictures say a lot more than I can. One of our more highlighted capital improvement projects that I'm going to touch on is we call it our Champion Stormwater Detention Basin. It's at the old Ravendale Country Club, and we're still in talks with the Cypress Forest Public Utility District to make that project a reality. We will be demolishing the Ravendale Clubhouse within 2 months or less. So that will be a big change for those of y'all that drive down Cypress Wood Drive towards 249. So, but we'll make sure that the community knows about that before it happens. So here's an example of a completed project that was paid for with bond funds. This is in the Ponderosa Forest neighborhood. This is a man-made channel that was built to drain the neighborhood when the neighborhood was originally built in the 70s. The channel reached the end of its useful life, and we completely rebuilt it. So it's a concrete line channel. We don't have too many of those. We have some in the Cypress Creek watershed. We don't have too many. This is one of them, and it was concrete, and we replaced the concrete. And so you may not have saw this project because it's mostly in people's backyards, and you really have to know where to look when you drive over it. But we did complete this project last year, and it will help maintain the level drainage that's in the Ponderosa Forest area for the next 50 years, which is the design life of these particular types of channels. Another project that's in construction right now, it's getting close to the end though, is serving Timberlake Estates, Ravensway, and Cypress Creek Estates. And this is actually not a maintenance project, it's a capital improvement project or a drainage improvement project where there was a small channel, also a man-made channel. It doesn't have a name. It has a number, and we like to use numbers, but y'all don't like them, so I won't say it. But we took that channel. It was a natural, not a natural channel, but just grass line, not concrete line. And we have enclosed that channel into concrete boxes that can hold much more water than the previous channel could. And there's a potential, I can't make any promises, but there's a potential that Harris County Precinct 3 might put a trail on top of it for people to recreate on. Because the channel's gone, it's covered in concrete boxes. And so this project is in construction. And again, if you know where to look, you can see it, but it's also mainly in people's backyards in those 3 neighborhoods. Here's another big project that we have going on right now as we speak. And in fact, I have a note here that very close to where we are right now, you can go see our contractor at work on TC Jester north of Louetta, where it crosses the channel at the very top right-hand corner of the slide, where that channel crosses TC Jester. Our contractor's actually out there working today and probably the rest of this week and next week if you want to see. But we call this the major maintenance of Cypress Creek. So I mentioned earlier that in the past we really didn't have enough money to do all the maintenance that we needed to do for all the drainage systems in the Cypress Creek watershed. The bond program set aside $60 million to complete those maintenance projects that we've had to defer sometimes for decades. And so what you'll see is this is the batch 1. A lot of folks have asked me, well, why didn't you just do everything at once? Why are you spacing out these projects into smaller $9, $10, $12 million construction projects? Most of the contractors that do our work aren't big enough to do a $60 million construction project. So we break it into smaller projects so that people that know how to do our work can bid on our work and win it. And so this is batch 1, where our contractor will be working. And again, they're already underway in construction. You might see the construction will probably look something like this. What they're doing is taking a channel that we may not have properly maintained. We mow 3 times a year. We always have mowed. But sometimes the channel banks slough off, or sometimes silt gets deposited. Sometimes the pipes fail that come off the storm sewers. These projects will address all of those issues to return these channels back to their full design capacity when they were originally built. And these projects will be going on probably for the next 5 to 6 years all across the Cypress Creek watershed. That was batch 1. This is batch 2. We'll probably end up having 5 or 6 different batches of construction projects. We'll always notify y'all. All this information's on our website. You can look it all up. But these are the locations of batch 2, which is a construction contract we've already awarded, but the construction has not yet started. This is a program that we finished up last year. This is the Natural Resources Conservation Service, is a federal government agency that helped award the Flood Control District over $80 million to do repairs that are directly related to Hurricane Harvey. And we completed 38 of those projects in the Cypress Creek watershed, spending over $20 million. And you may have noticed some of these projects. Some of them are very close to here. You just, when you're driving around going over bridges, just kind of look left and right. And if the channel looks brand spanking new, that's one of these projects that we finished up last year. And so we're very appreciative of the Natural Resources Conservation Service partnering with us on that. And again, it was a county-wide effort, over $100 million that we completed in less than 3 years, which in government time is light speed, trust me. So we're pretty happy with that. This is an example of one of those projects in the beginning, and this is on the main stem of Cypress Creek. My notes will tell me exactly where it is. I actually went out this site, or maybe my notes won't tell me exactly where it is. That's okay. Oh, right here at Kirkendall. It's not even in my notes. So this is what the channel looked like before. That's an old storm sewer manhole that used to be in the ground, and the channel had eroded so bad that the manhole was left standing in the air. And our engineers and our contractors rebuilt that entire slope back to the way it should be. And of course, now there's vegetation on here. This was completed right when the contractor was done, and we come back and establish turf so that it doesn't look like that. But this is just an example of some of those repairs that we're doing. And again, you may not be able to see these. You might have to walk on the creek or really pay attention. Make sure if you're driving, look at the road, but if you're a passenger, when you cross bridges, look, and you might be able to catch a glimpse of these projects. But there are quite a few out there. I couldn't hear her question. Oh, when we plant vegetation, typically what we do is we come back and establish turf grass, and we use. I have to ask my guys what type. They have a seed mix that they use that works on different soil types, and it varies on where we are in the county. Dr. Bedient mentioned that there are sandier soils up here, so I don't know the exact type, but it's some type of okay. And then a lot of times too, we come back and plant trees along these channels as well to help stabilize the banks. Subdivision drainage projects. Okay, so these are projects that are also part of the bond program, and these are where we actually go into various subdivisions, and I have those, here they are, and actually complete improvements to the drainage in front of your house, not behind your house in the channels, but in the streets and the storm sewers. So we have several of those projects underway. The Forest Shadow, I'm just going to read these out just in case you might live in one of these neighborhoods. Forest Shadows, we expect to start construction in that neighborhood next summer. Foxwood neighborhood, we expect construction to start at the end of this year, if not early next year. Linwood Estates, construction is expected to start next spring. We have Memorial Hills subdivision. Construction is expected next fall, so a little over a year away. Prestonwood Forest, construction expected to begin by the end of this year. Sandpiper Village, we have construction expected next summer, so about a year from now. And Spring Cypress at Luetta Apartments, we expect construction to begin later this year. So these are the projects you will notice, because we will be tearing up the streets and disrupting your lives a little bit more than the projects and the channels behind your houses. But they're all for a good cause and to help the local drainage in your neighborhoods improve much better. Cypress Creek Implementation Plan. So Dr. Bedient mentioned that for years, Cypress Creek has been growing. There wasn't a concerted effort or a plan to improve drainage. And I don't have an excuse for that. I don't have a reason for that. But what we have done is we have completed a new plan. It's hot off the presses on my desk, not available to the public yet because I still want to mark it up a little bit. But we do have a plan to provide 14,000 acre-feet of stormwater detention along the main stem of Cypress Creek. We have the site selected. We know what we want to build. We know what order we want to build it in, and we have an estimate how much it's going to cost. So we are going to finalize that, clean it up, and we will present it to y'all, the public, so that y'all can tell us where we went wrong or where we went right. But we do have a plan now, and now once we get that plan finalized and approved, we can start executing it. And in some ways, we already are working on some of the aspects of that plan. The first part of that plan is land. One of the things that in Dr. Bedient's presentation is he mentioned some reservoirs on some of the tributaries to Cypress Creek. Well, those reservoirs are where people live. We're not here going to buy out. We are buying out several neighborhoods that are flood-prone neighborhoods, but that's not a very popular task that we get ourselves involved in. It's very expensive. It's very time-consuming. So with the bond program, we were able to have money set aside to acquire empty property, vacant land all along Cypress Creek. This map is really hard to read. We have a better one on our website, but we have acquired over 460 acres of land where no one lives, that is undeveloped, and we spent over $35 million. And all this land, almost all this land, not all of it, but almost all this land will be used for future stormwater detention basins. We cannot build projects if we don't have the right-of-way. And we are buying out some neighborhoods in Cypress Creek, that's true. But again, that's not the best practice that we want to follow. We want to work on, we want people to stay where they are, enjoy their homes, enjoy their neighborhoods, their neighbors, and buy property that is vacant, and then put stormwater detention there. An example of that is our property that we already owned on, really close to here again, on TC Jester and Cypress Wood, where we're already excavating a new stormwater detention basin. Some other good news is we get asked, well, how are we going to pay for all this? And sometimes I have the answer and sometimes I don't. This year, for the first time in a long time, our representatives in Congress are allowed to submit community projects for funding, aka earmarks. And Congressman Dan Crenshaw decided to use his earmarks on 2 projects here in this neighborhood. One for the Westador Stormwater Detention Basin and one for the TC Jester Stormwater Detention Basin for almost $20 million. Now, this hasn't been finalized and approved. Congress and the federal government moves relatively slowly, but getting to this point where it's in a bill that's being debated by the House of Representatives and eventually the Senate is a huge step. And I also want you to, there's several pages of these community-funded projects, but I do want you to know that I don't know how he did it, and maybe I don't want to know how he did it, but you can see that the money that he's bringing home to the flood control district for projects in your neighborhood is much, much more than other projects in other parts of the country. And so this is a huge deal because Congress hasn't had earmarks in a really long time, and it means a lot that one of our members of Congress he could have picked any project he wanted, and he picked 2 projects here in this neighborhood. So we're really appreciative of that. Another piece of good news that we found out last week is that the flood control district's been working with FEMA for 3 years to get approval to remove accumulated sediment and debris in several of our channels all across Harris County. And we literally found out end of last week that FEMA has approved this after 3 years of working with them. And so why is it a big deal? Well, FEMA has approved almost $250 million to the flood control district to do these types of projects. And I highlighted the Cypress Creek number, which is basically $27 million for Cypress Creek and around $20.6 million for Little Cypress Creek. Some other watersheds of note are Addicks Reservoir, Barker Reservoir, Greens Bayou. We were awarded almost $60 million, which used to be our annual CIP. We received that much just for one bayou. Spring Creek, White Oak Bayou, and Willow Creek. And so there are a lot more steps in place before this money becomes available to the flood control district. Some more action has to be taken by Congress. The money has to be sent down to the Texas Division of Emergency Management. We have to get it from the Texas Division of Emergency Management and sign agreements. So there's a lot more bureaucracy ahead of us. But the fact that this has been appropriated and obligated is a huge step, and it's been a 3-year battle for it. And so the area in orange is where we're going to spend this money and do the work. It's basically from Telge on the upstream side down to Kirkendall on the main stem of Cypress Creek. And so that work, I have a draft schedule. Everyone says, well, when you're going to start work? And I say, okay, we made a schedule. And so we anticipate, if everything goes really well, that construction will begin in the spring of 2023 after finding out that we got the award last week. And I know that sounds like a really long time, because it is, but this is just the nature of us working with the federal government, the state government, and then getting things done at the local level. But again, I do want to thank all of our members of Congress that helped make this happen for us, because we have been working on this since 2018, and here we are in 2021, and we got it done. Oh, and by the way, another set of kudos to our state representatives. In the 2019 session, they passed a bill that allows for the flood control district, or any entity in Texas actually, but we'll focus on us. When we get grants from FEMA, we have to pay a portion. So in this case, FEMA's paying 90%, we're paying 10%, but the state will reimburse us for 3/4 of our local share. So we don't have to pay 10% of $250 million. We only have to pay $6.2 million because the state will reimburse us for 75% or 3/4 of that 10%. So that's a real big help to all local agencies in Texas, but especially the flood control district. We're literally turning $6.2 million of your tax money into a $250 million project, which is unbelievable. So we appreciate that. So last but not least, we want to hear from you. I see a lot of familiar faces in here. Some are friendly and some aren't, but that's okay. I like everybody. I just know Larry, be nice to me. And I want y'all to get in touch with us any way you feel comfortable. Talk to me. Leave comments on our website. We are on the Twitter and the Facebook and the Instagram and all those things. I have folks that know how to do that stuff. I don't, but we're on all of that, and we can be reached. And again, as Paul mentioned, I do want to say that everyone should buy flood insurance in Harris County, no matter where you live. If you've never flooded or you flooded 20 times, we always advise people to buy flood insurance. Thank you.
As far as questions for our state representative or for Matt, if you've got those questions written down on your card, just wave your card. Ushers, we have one here from a fellow by the name of Bill Kellen for Representative Harless. He says Cypress Creek floods beyond other watersheds. Why is Cypress Creek the most underfunded of watersheds? How can monies from the bond be increased?
This question is Cypress Creek floods beyond any other watershed. Well, it doesn't. Believe it or not, there are watersheds in Harris County that have a much worse time with the flooding history and with drainage level service than Cypress Creek. Dr. Bedient brought up the Brays Bayou watershed many times. That is by far and away our most flood-prone watershed in terms of number of homes flooded over the past 30 years. So this isn't the worst, not by a long shot. But there are flooding issues here. No one's denying that. And it's not the most underfunded watershed either. So over a period of time, before the bond program, the flood control district was funding limited. And what I mean by that is our annual budget was $120 million per year. And that was for everything. That was for my salary. That was for paying the light bill. That was for our fleet of vehicles. That was for everything. So when you think about $120 million, you're like, man, that is a lot of money. And it is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money for all of Harris County. Harris County is just too big of a place, and there's too many channels. I mentioned we're responsible for 2,500 miles of channel. That's LA to New York in a straight line. And so when we had to be very, very strategic and careful about how we spent that limited amount of money that we had in the past. And most of that money, our capital improvement money in the past, went to our partnership projects with the United States Army Corps of Engineers on Hunting Bayou, on Greens Bayou, on White Oak Bayou, on Brays Bayou, and now very soon to be Clear Creek. And that was just because the Corps gave us the most money, and they asked for some in return. And so that was a very short version of why some watersheds were underfunded when other watersheds received more money from flood control over decades. But with the bond program, we've reversed that. And in fact, the flood control districts actually, since the bond program has passed, the flood control districts actually spent the most money in the Cypress Creek watershed compared to any other watershed. And a lot of that is due to right-of-way acquisition, so I want to caveat that. But we are investing in this watershed in a big way, and we'll continue to do so over the next decade.
Here's a question from Jim Robertson for Matt Zeve. Does the sediment removal work essentially create inline detention?
The sediment removal work is not going to create inline detention, Jim. What the whole point of that program is that, and maybe some of y'all even saw it if you paid attention, the amount of material that was left behind when the floodwaters went down after Harvey, the sand in parking lots and on golf courses and other low-lying areas, there's a lot of that in the channel too. And some of that some of that sediment ends up being like a blockage or gets in the way for the next flood. And we were able to work with FEMA to develop a process to prove how much material was deposited in the channels. and quantify that, and now we're getting paid to take it out of the channel so that there's more capacity in the channel itself.
Thank you. Here is a question, a legal question for our state representative from Mark Schultz. Buying out homes in flood-prone areas is good, but what is being done to stop building in flood areas?
That's a great question, and that was one of the reasons I filed my flood encroachment bill with Matt Zeve in the 86th legislative session. You know, they came to me and there was over 4,000 people had encroachments on flood control property in Harris County. They would have to sue the homeowners at an expense of $1.8 million a year to get those encroachments moved so they could have access to do maintenance on their projects. So we filed a bill and we got it passed and we expedited that. And then we did our bill this session for assisted living facilities in a 100-year floodplain. Look, during Hurricane Harvey, after the water went down, my wife and I helped evacuate people out of assisted living facilities over here. And that was probably something that will stick with me for the rest of my life. You're taking people out, and there's seniors that are in the prime of their life, their twilight years, and you're taking them out, they have nothing but the clothes on their back. They don't even have the medication that they need to take. Think about that. They don't know where they're going to live that night or the next 6 months. And I'll never forget this. We were helping Precinct 4 constables lift a gentleman in a wheelchair into the back of a high water rescue vehicle. And he was telling me he didn't know where he was going to go, didn't know where he was going to get his medication, a change of clothes that night. I mean, think about that. And I promised him if I didn't pass any bill, I would make sure I addressed that to where no more assisted living facilities were built in the 100-year floodplain. And the reason a lot of these people do it is the land is cheaper in a 100-year floodplain. My district office right across the street, it flooded before, but you know what? I'm a big boy. I can take care of that. If it floods, it floods. I'll clean it up. But our seniors don't, and that's wrong. And we need to, and I was so happy I got that bill through. When I filed the bill, everybody came to me and said it didn't have a chance. It did have a chance, and it did get signed by Governor Abbott, and I'm very appreciative of it. Our job, thank you. Our job is to work with Harris County Flood Control in the community, is to advocate for the appropriations necessary to get the jobs done, and to keep you informed. And we try to do that through social media, our Facebook page, our Twitter, and all that stuff. And normally this time of year, we'd be sending out a constitutional newsletter telling you which constitutional items are on the ballot November 2nd. Well, because Governor Abbott vetoed Article 10 of the budget, which is our budget that we use to do that, we won't be sending that out this year. However, if you sign up for our email newsletters, we're going to send it out in an email newsletter. So if any of y'all are inclined, just fill it out and give us our information, and we'll make sure that you get the language to help you understand the constitutional amendments. But yes, that's a bad problem about building in the 100-year floodplain. And you know, I don't want to tell somebody they can't sell their property if they've owned it for a long time and they've been servicing the debt on it. I don't want to tell them that they can't sell it and what they can do, but I want to minimize the risk for seniors.
Thank you. Mark Schultz gets a double whammy here for Matt Zeve. When you fund a project and select a company to do the project, do you offer an incentive to finish early?
That's a good question. So I've tried that, and the question is, do I offer an incentive for them to work faster? I tried it, and for some reason, the Harris County Attorney's Office says I'm not allowed to do that. So what I do is I just I'm really, really mean to them, and I tell them, I said, look, if you want a project with the flood control district, because every engineering firm in town wants a project with the flood control district, I said, if we agree upon this schedule and you meet or beat it, I'll keep you busy on another project. But if you don't meet or beat it, then you won't get another project with the flood control district. And so that's about as much power as I have from where I sit. And I'm a man of my word, and you can ask any consulting firm in town and they'll say that I stick to it. So I try to get these projects as fast, done as quickly as we can. I know it takes a long time, but trust me, I have a lot of folks, hundreds of folks, probably working right now on flood control projects in Harris County.
Thank you, Matt. Frank Adamick has a question for you also. On Cypress Creek, well-maintained tributaries are putting more water into the main channel. When will flood control perform main channel maintenance to allow Cypress Creek to convey water as originally designed?
Sure thing, Frank, and good question. And that's exactly what this FEMA grant, the $260 million we received from FEMA is intended to do. It's to go into those main stems that I mentioned, and some tributaries in the Addicks, Barker, Cypress, Greens, Little Cypress Spring, White Oak, and Willow Creek watersheds, and remove those blockages and remove that accumulated sediment in those main channels, so that as we improve flow from the tributaries, the main channels can keep moving it downstream.
Thank you, Matt. Dave Richards from Norchester says, what exactly will Norchester Drainage Project entail? Details, please.
I don't know off the top of my head the exact details. However, the details of the project in Norchester are on our website, so you can go to our website, hcfcd.org, and there's a search bar, and you can type in Norchester, and you'll find out what the details are. And if that doesn't work for you, just get a hold of Paul and George, and they know how to get a hold of me, and I'll get you more details than you probably want to know.
Probably true. Charles has a question for you. What happens to the sediment after the removal?
That's a good question. So what we do, and we do this on all, we do desilting projects all the time, all over the county. It's two main steps. First, we test the sediment with a company to make sure that it's called HTW, hazardous and toxic waste, but it's just hazardous waste testing to make sure there's nothing bad in the sediment. And the reason is that there's different landfills around the county that have different classifications. Different landfills will only accept certain types of waste. So we have to prove if our contractor or my own staff are taking silt to a landfill to dispose of it, they have to prove it's clean to the landfill operator. So that's step one. Step two is we either dispose of the sediment in a landfill, or a contractor can stockpile it in a location outside of the floodplain and clean it and sell it for reuse.
Also, during this legislative session, my friend Chairman Dan Huberty from the Kingwood area and myself, we were able to get $50 million appropriated in the state budget for dredging of Lake Houston. And so that's found money also.
Wow, Sam, you've got some stroke, dude. Larry Lipton has a question for Matt Zeve. If $2.5 billion is being spent for the current projects, what percent is being spent in North Harris County? Why not more in our area?
Larry, I saw you in here earlier. There you are. I don't know the percent off the top of my head. I used to know all these numbers when we had a $120 million a year budget, but now that we do about $400 million worth of work, I don't have it all memorized. But I can follow. I have your phone number, your email. I can call you and we can talk and I can get you that information. But I honestly don't know it off the top of my head.
Raymond has a question for Matt Zeve. What is being done to speed the flow of water under Interstate 45? This was a dam during Harvey.
So I've heard the I-45 is a dam, and we've looked at it every angle and every way possible. And I-45 wasn't a dam during Hurricane Harvey. Did portions of it go underwater? Absolutely. There's no disputing that whatsoever. I do know that the southbound frontage road is going to be completely reconstructed by TxDOT in the coming years, and it will be higher than the existing southbound frontage road. That's the upstream side or the west side of the separated highway. But we don't have any plans to make any modifications to the channel of Cypress Creek underneath I-45. This topic has been brought up to me ad nauseum, and so I felt that I've addressed it. My staff's addressed it, and we're going to leave it at that.
Dave Richards has a question for you, Matt. He says, will the I-45 project help flooding problems?
The replacement of the southbound frontage road?
I think he's talking about the big I-45 thing.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about the big I-45 reconstruction project that's further down into town. So that project basically runs from Beltway 8 all the way into downtown Houston. And that part of I-45 none of it's in the Cypress Creek watershed. However, if the project gets built, which is up in the air right now, to be totally honest with you, And I'm not getting into that topic because that's not a flood. I stay in my lane over here. If it does get built, yes, it will help drainage and flooding in the Greens Bayou watershed, the Halls Bayou watershed, and the White Oak Bayou watershed tremendously.
We have a question about what will reduce flooding on York Minster Drive and Wimbledon Estate subdivision?
What will reduce flooding
On York Minster Drive in Wimbledon Estate subdivision, which is just right over here.
I don't know the answer to that. I need to find out exactly where that street is. I need to look at the topography. I need to look at how the storm sewer system works out there. Again, if you, whoever asked that, if you get in touch with George or Paul, give me your name, your email address, your phone number, I'll look it up and I'll call you and I'll walk you through what we can do out there.
We have a question from Miriam, and I'm not clear on it. It says, I think she wants to know something more about what projects of tree planting. Can you give her some more specifics about tree planting?
Sure thing. So the Flood Control District plants around 30,000 trees a year all across the county. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less. There's a tree planting season, which we're not in right now, not in the middle of summer. But we typically do tree plantings along or in our stormwater detention basins, or when we totally rebuild a channel for erosion control. There's other places that we plant trees as well along our rights of way, typically to support a new precinct park. But we plant them many different places all across the county, and we do that every year. We spend a lot of money on trees.
I've got a question from Kevin McHugh. Will development on the upper Cypress Creek make our flooding worse? Is the development being controlled, or will the third reservoir be built as planned?
What was the first part, Paul?
Will development on upper Cypress Creek make our flooding worse?
So will development make flooding worse? So the current drainage regulations in Harris County are extremely strict. So if you were even to take a look at the neighborhoods that probably most of y'all live in that were built, they don't even have stormwater detention basins that serve those neighborhoods. All of the developments that are built now have to have very strict stormwater detention basins, and it actually got much more strict after Hurricane Harvey. Will that development increase flooding? Well, the new development will not increase flooding, but what we worry about is the flooding for the existing development. What we found after Hurricane Harvey is less than 0.1% of homes, of homes that took on water were built after 2009, when that was the last major revamp of construction standards for neighborhoods. So we really need to focus on the retrofitting of existing neighborhoods to prevent flooding in those existing neighborhoods. We feel our drainage criteria works. We saw that proof, so to speak, during Harvey, when really most of the homes that flooded were built pre-2009. But does new development cause more runoff? Yes. There's no doubt that there will be more runoff coming down the creek, but because of the detention basins that hold that water, it won't send it all down at one time in a big deluge of water. And is there anything to do to stop development? No. This is a strong property rights state, and if people follow all the rules and regulations in where they want to do their project, they can build their project. And no, I do not believe the third reservoir will be constructed.
Covered all of that. Sylvia Tucker has a question. If detention ponds are 10% effective, is there something a more effective plan?
I'm not sure what you mean by 10% effective. So I don't think I can answer that question because I'm not fully clear on it.
Okay. Here's the follow-up. Much of the flood improvements are in the immediate vicinity of Cypress Creek. Why?
Our flood improvements are, okay, well, that's a good question. We want to build our flood improvements where the flooding is. And so the source of the flooding is Cypress Creek, so that's where we want to build most of our stormwater detention basins. Essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to build more places for the stormwater to go. That's not someone's home. That's not someone's business. And so by doing that, we build big holes in the ground, stormwater detention basins, providing a place for that water to go that's not a home or someone's home or business.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you the L question.
Okay, what's that?
What about levees?
I was briefed about levees, and Harris County only has 2 levees right now. One's on Cypress Creek in the Inverness Forest neighborhood. The other one's on Spring Creek in the Northgate subdivision up on I-45 in Spring Creek. The flood control district policy is to not allow any new levees in the county. There's various reasons for that, but levees are, in my opinion, now this is just my opinion, there's plenty of opinions out there. In my opinion, levees are not a viable option for flood damage, for flood protection in the Cypress Creek watershed. And the reason is that levees take an incredible amount of land to build. If you were to go to Inverness Forest and go walk up to the top of their levee and look down both sides and measure the footprint of that levee, and then you try to put a levee around here, and you say, I need that 500, 600 feet of land, all this is developed. Who wants to give up their business to build a levee? Who wants to move out of their homes? How many hundreds of people want to move their homes to build a levee? It's very, very unlikely that the amount of land that we need to build a levee is available in these very highly developed areas. Plus, when you build a levee, I'm sure y'all played with water balloons, right? Or your kids have, or you have, and you have a water balloon and you squeeze it and it gets skinny inside your hand, but what happens on either side of your hand? It gets wider. That's exactly what a levee would do to the Cypress Creek floodplain. So what happens to those people up on either side of that levee where the wider part happens? Well, we have to mitigate for that too. And what does that take? That takes even more land. So who's going to give up their home and their business for that? And we have to do more and more buyouts, and we have to move more and more infrastructure. It's very difficult to build levees in already developed areas. If there was open country, where there's no buildings and no roads, no gas lines, no utility lines, levees might be a more realistic option. But I just feel personally, in my experience, and I'm not as experienced as Dr. Bedient. I've only been doing drainage in Harris County for 21 years. I don't think that they're a viable option in this neck of the woods.
From Frank, gauge 1120 at the east side of I-45 measures 97 feet flood elevation.
Paul, I've answered, Frank, wherever you are. I've answered your question, that question, there you are. I've answered that question literally 100 times. I'm not going to answer it again. We can agree to disagree. How about that?
Thank you very much, and thank you to our speakers, Matt, and State Representative Sam, and Dr. Bedient, who is probably halfway to Sugar Land now. Thank you all for coming to learn more about flooding on Cypress Creek. Those of you who want to pitch in with us, please see one of the ushers and leave us your name and number. And we thank you all for coming, and we thank the Centrum for loaning us their wonderful facility. Good night.